A fighter the United States Navy buried back in 2006 just flew into live combat. The footage comes out of Iran. Fully armed F-14 Tomcats recovering onto a runway after a real patrol. The first confirmed Tomcat combat since 1988. A 50-year-old machine, still climbing, still hunting, and the world stops to stare. Analysts marvel at Iran's F-14s, a radar still larger than anything in a Western fighter, still tracking cruise missiles half a century after it left the factory. But there is a truth almost nobody says out loud. Not a single line of that airframe, not one curve of its aerodynamics, not one algorithm inside that radar belongs to Iran. The Tomcat is a genuinely dangerous machine, and it has never, for one day, been an Iranian fighter. What stunned the world in 2026 is American engineering from the 1970s, Grumman's and the United States Navy's. This is a legend of our fleet, flying under a hostile flag. And here's the part that strains belief. The same nation that built this machine spent 2 decades shredding every F-14 it could find into 2x2-foot scraps, torching apart titanium beams so no part could ever reach Iran. Yet in 2026, that same nation passed a bill to weld 3 of them back into flying condition. So what makes a half-century-old machine worth keeping aloft by its enemy and worth resurrecting by the very hands that condemned it? Not the fame. The answer lives inside the way this aircraft was built. This is Navy Decoded. We don't retell legends you have heard 1,000 times. We take the machine apart and show you the engineering that made it so complete that time, embargo, and the cutting torch all failed to kill it. And to understand that, you have to start with the problem it was born to solve. That problem was not an enemy airplane. It was arithmetic. In the late Cold War, the deadliest threat to a carrier strike group was never a single enemy fighter. It was a flock. Regiments of Soviet bombers, Tu-16 Badgers, Tu-22s, later the swing-wing Tu-22M Backfire. Each carried long-range anti-ship cruise missiles launched from 200 nautical miles out and beyond. Picture the saturation raid, dozens of warheads arriving at once, from every bearing, converging on a single hull. That is the problem the Navy handed its designers. And the arithmetic is brutal. You cannot swat each missile once it is already in the air. You have to stop the Archer before the bow is drawn, pushing your kill line out far enough to destroy the bombers before their launch point. The equation is time times distance times target count. A single-seat fighter with a short-range radar and 1 missile per target cannot solve it. The numbers do not close. The Navy's first attempt at a fighter that could solve this nearly broke the service. Washington tried to force one common airframe on both the Air Force and the Navy, and the naval version, the F-111B, came out too heavy, with carrier landing behavior the fleet could not accept. It took Vice Admiral Thomas Connolly testifying against his own department to get Congress to cut the program in 1968. But the Navy kept 2 jewels from the wreckage, the AWG-9 radar and the Phoenix missile. Grumman threw away the rest and built a brand new airframe around them, and the name Tomcat carried a quiet salute to Tom's cat, to Connolly himself. And that is the key to this entire video. The F-14 was not designed from the airframe outward, it was designed from the weapon system inward. The radar and the missile came first. The airplane was built around them, the way a freighter is built around its cargo. So let's start with that cargo. Let's start at the nose. The Hughes ANAWG-9, the heart of the machine, held the title of most powerful radar ever fitted to an operational fighter for 30 years, until the F-22's APG-77 arrived in 2005. It tracked 24 targets at once and held firing solutions on 6 of them independently, all while still sweeping the sky. The Tomcat was the first fighter on Earth to do this, and remains one of the very few that ever has. Now the fist behind the eye. The AIM-54 Phoenix was, for decades, the longest-ranged air-to-air missile any fighter had ever carried. The best missile most other nations could field, the AIM-7 Sparrow, reached about 15 nautical miles. The Phoenix reached 100. A Tomcat could destroy a target before its opponent had even resolved the F-14 on radar. Past Mach 4, ceiling above 100,000 feet, over 1,000 pounds, and the Tomcat was the only platform on the planet that could launch it. No other Air Force, no other nation ever held this weapon. The mechanism is the elegant part. The Phoenix is a true fire-and-forget weapon. It climbs into the stratosphere on mid-course guidance from the AWG-9, then lights its own active radar for the final stretch, freeing the mother radar to guide the next shot. That is how one airplane fights 6 engagements at once. In 1973, a single Tomcat fired 6 Phoenix at 6 separate targets in one pass, the 6-on-6 test, and half a century later, no fighter has repeated it. Now imagine that same airframe on an American carrier deck today. The missiles under its wings would not be Iran's homemade Fa-Kor 90, the copy reverse-engineered from a captured Phoenix. They would be the newest American iron, the AIM-120D AMRAAM, the AIM-9X Sidewinder, the long-range AIM-174B that just gave the fleet back its reach. A 50-year-old jet carrying the weapons of today because it was always an American platform built for American hardware. All of that has to live somewhere, and the AWG-9's antenna alone is 3 feet across. That is why the nose is so oversized. On this aircraft, the weapon defined the shape of the airplane, never the other way around. The nose gives us reach. But that reach only matters if the airframe can carry it to the right spot, slow enough to hold station 200 nautical miles out, fast enough to dash to the intercept at Mach 2. That is a contradiction every other fighter has to compromise. The Tomcat refused to. A carrier interceptor has to do 3 jobs that fight each other. 1. Loiter slowly at 200 nautical miles to hold a patrol line for hours, which demands a large wing with high lift. 2. Dash past Mach 2 to race toward the intercept, which demands a small, swept wing with low drag. 3. Recover safely onto a crowded deck, which demands maximum lift at low speed. A fixed wing, like the F-15s, like nearly every conventional fighter, is forced to split the difference across all 3. Get good at one, and you give up the other 2. Grumman refused to split the difference. The Tomcat's wings changed their sweep angle to match the state of flight, spread to 20 degrees for a 64-foot span and 565 square feet of area in the loiter, takeoff, and landing regimes. Swept back to 68 degrees and a 38-foot span for Mach 2 and above. On deck, the crews can oversweep them to 75 degrees to save parking space. Same aircraft, best in class in all 3 regimes, no trade. And this is where the engineering reaches its peak. The Tomcat was built as a long-range interceptor, and it became one of the finest dogfighters ever to launch off a deck. So what does that buy in a close-in fight? Everything a heavy interceptor is not supposed to own. The Tomcat tips the scales near 74,000 pounds fully loaded. It has no business turning with a lightweight fighter. But spread the wings forward to 20 degrees and 565 square feet of area drops the wing loading through the floor. More lift, less energy bled in the turn, a tighter circle. And the pilot never manages it. The Central Air Data Computer schedules the sweep on its own, so in the heart of a merge, the wing is already where it needs to be while he keeps his hands on the fight. A fixed-wing fighter carries 1 wing for every job. The Tomcat reshapes itself to the moment. Sweep the wings back, and the same airframe becomes a clean, low-drag dart that holds its energy in the vertical and runs down whatever it points at. High-speed slash, low-speed scrap. The Tomcat does not have to choose. That is the gift of variable geometry. And all of it rests on a single wing box forged from 1 piece of titanium, strong enough to carry those G-loads through every sweep angle without tearing. Remember that titanium. It becomes the cruelest knot at the end of this story. The nose and the wings tell us what the Tomcat was built to do, and what it could do that no one expected of an aircraft its size. But a machine's true character only shows when you set it beside the one that replaced it, not to crown a winner, but to see 2 opposing philosophies of design. In 2006, the Tomcat left the deck, and the FA-18EF Super Hornet took its place. Ever since, people have argued the wrong question. Which one is better? That question has no answer, because these 2 machines were never answering the same question. They are 2 solutions to 2 different optimization problems. The right question is not, which is better? It is, what was each one built to optimize? The Tomcat was optimized for a single objective: win the air battle in defense of the fleet at any cost. It owned that mission end to end, from a Phoenix kill at 100 nautical miles down to a turning fight in the merge. Everything served air dominance. The long reach, the enormous radar, the morphing wing that let a 74,000-pound interceptor knife fight. And the price was real. Heavy, complex, 30 to 60 maintenance hours for every hour in the air. That is the bill for refusing every compromise inside the one domain it was built to rule. The Super Hornet was optimized for the opposite problem. The Cold War was over, the Soviet bomber swarm had dissolved, budgets had tightened, and a carrier air wing now needed one airframe to balance the whole mission set. Air combat, strike, reconnaissance, aerial tanking, and, in the Growler variant, electronic warfare. The Super Hornet deliberately traded away the extreme reach. Its AMRAAM reaches roughly 70 to 86 nautical miles, its combat radius is shorter, in exchange for things the Tomcat never had. Sensor fusion, a networked data link, far lighter maintenance, lower cost, and more fire-and-forget missiles per sortie. It is an outstanding multi-mission aircraft, still flying on the front line today. This is the heart of it: difference, not hierarchy. Optimizing for one objective buys supremacy but costs weight, money, and upkeep. Optimizing across many buys flexibility and endurance but tops out short of supreme at any single one. The Super Hornet was designed to blend into a larger system, and it does that brilliantly. The Tomcat was designed to be the entire system itself. Different roles, different fates. Now gather the nose and the wings together and watch what happens when they fuse into a single thing, whole enough that neither its enemy nor its maker could let it go. Taken apart, each piece is impressive. But the legend was never in the pieces. It is that they form one closed system. The nose sees 24 targets and throws the Phoenix 100 nautical miles out. The morphing wings carry the airframe to the right spot and speed to take the shot, then bring it home to the deck. Remove one link and the whole equation collapses. This is not a fighter that carries good weapons. It is a fleet air defense system packaged into a flying airframe. So now, the question from the opening: why is America restoring 3 of them? Start with what that bought us. Through the Cold War, Tomcats stood watch against Soviet bombers across the GI-UK gap, and the saturation raid never came. The Phoenix was almost never fired in anger by American crews, and that was not waste, it was victory. When the other side runs the math and sees no opening, the battle ends before it begins. A system so correct it never had to prove itself. That is the first layer of the legend. But that same wholeness created a stranger problem, the root of why we later destroyed our own jets. When the embargo hit Iran in 1979, American intelligence was certain the 79 Tomcats there would be scrapped within months without Grumman. Half a century later, they are still flying. Iran even pushed a reverse-engineered Phoenix, the Fa-Kor 90, into production in 2018. It was precisely because the design was so close to undying that the Pentagon later had to destroy it so brutally. Cutting the titanium apart with torches was the only way to be certain no spare ever reached Tehran's fleet. We shredded the Tomcat because it was too perfect to die on its own. Return to that footage we opened with. What stunned the analyst in 2026 was not anything Iran invented. It was an American design so complete that nearly 50 years of embargo, with no factory parts and no Grumman engineers, still could not kill it. Iran keeps these jets flying, an impressive feat of maintenance under sanctions. But maintenance keeps a machine alive. Only the design makes it worth keeping alive. Every flight hour of the Iranian F-14 is an endurance test that 1970s American engineering is still passing. Call it Iran's jet if you like, but the genius on display belongs to the drafting tables of Long Island, not Tehran. The flag painted on the tail changed. Every rivet of the engineering underneath it stayed American. So why bring them back now, after 2 decades of grinding them into scrap? Because by 2026, the calculus that justified the destruction had shifted. Iran's pool of donor airframes had run thin, and Tehran's maintenance network was worn down. For the first time in 20 years, a titanium hostage could be set free. And so the Maverick Act, Senate Bill S-4161, would let the Navy hand 3 airframes from the AMARG boneyard to a center in Huntsville. One of them coaxed back into flying condition, the other 2 preserved whole for public display. All of it funded by private donation, not a dollar of taxpayer money. And one of those 3 is no anonymous hull. It is Bureau number 159437, the VF-32 Swordsman F-14A, that, on January 4, 1989, downed a Libyan MiG-23 over the Gulf of Sidra and has carried the name MiG-23 Killer ever since. The same machine that once used the very system we just dissected, radar, reach, the morphing wing, to win a real fight is being pulled back from the edge of the scrap line and welded whole again, this time to stand before the next generation of engineers rather than to fly another patrol. A legend with a combat record, saved from the torch that nearly took it. So return to the question we opened with. Why is a machine this expensive, this demanding, this long retired, worth both destroying and resurrecting? Before we answer that, one thing. If taking a machine apart down to its physics is what you came for, that is the whole reason Navy Decoded exists. Subscribe, and we will keep doing exactly this. Now, the answer. It is not the air combat record, and it is not ease of operation. The Tomcat was never easy. The answer sits somewhere an engineer rarely says out loud. The F-14 is a legend because it was built whole, a complete fleet defense system inside a single airframe, not a fighter carrying a few good weapons. The nose, the folding wings, the philosophy of being its own system, none of it was decoration. It ran so deep that the machine both deterred its enemy without firing a shot and refused to die for half a century. It is why America once cut this jet's titanium beams apart, afraid it was too well built to die, and now welds those same beams back together. Not to fire a missile, but so a new generation can see what a machine built right looks like. Most weapons are remembered for what they did. The Tomcat is remembered for the completeness of what it was. Engineer something so thoroughly that its enemy will not test it, and its own maker cannot leave it in the ground, and the line between a weapon and a legend begins to disappear. That is the Tomcat, and the kind of machine we will keep taking apart, one airframe at a time, for as long as you keep watching.